Good afternoon. Welcome to our focus forum. I'm hoping we've got a good audience here today. We're just going to let people filter in before we actually start. Looks like we've got 21 and growing, 20, 30 and growing, 33, 34. We're going to have a great session today. So I hope you all enjoy this session. And I think we can start. So welcome to our Focus Forum. I'm Rita Reichert, President of the Board of Focus Greater Syracuse. Happy to have you with us here today. A reminder that the purpose of Focus Forums is to educate the public on what is going on with important community issues. So today our topic is housing needs in Central New York. What's going on? We have three very knowledgeable individuals who will speak on the topic from a few different perspectives, and they will be formally introduced in just a moment. As usual, we're scheduled for 1 hour, and we are recording this session. We'll begin with presentations from our guests, followed by Q&A, which will be led by Brian Hoke. Now, I'm very pleased to turn this over to our moderator, Lanessa Owens-Chaplet, to introduce our panelists. Lanessa is a Focus Board member and Assistant Director of the Education Policy Center of the New York Civil Liberties Union, leading the statewide initiative to end environmental injustice and its impact to school-aged children. Lanessa.
Thank you, Rita, and thanks everyone for coming, especially our panelists here today. I think everyone here is really interested to hear about the housing issues that we have here in Syracuse and what these wonderful folks on the panel are going to tell us to anticipate in the upcoming years to come. So I want to begin by introducing Dan Nowalski. He is the Planning Director for the City Onondaga County Planning Agency. In other words, better known as SOPCA, a combined city-county planning agency. Dan lives in the village of Marcellus with his wife, Karen, and two children, Jonah and Colden. Dan is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and has been working as a planner and verifying applications for 21 years, including as a town planner and director for 8 years, a private consultant planning and director and entrepreneur for 6 years, river restoration specialist, hydropower regulatory and environmental specialist, and as an executive director of a land trust in Lake Placid. Dan is an avid mountain and road cyclist with volunteer experience in planning, designing, and building a variety of mountain bikes, very interesting, and a multi-use trails and trail system. With no further ado, I'll introduce Dan.
Thanks, Lanessa. So I'm gonna, because I have such great partners on this, including Lanessa, who's always very helpful in pushing us to our highest levels with housing, but Michelle and Sam are probably going to get into the weeds a little bit more than I will. But we have a very exciting project at the county, not Micron, but that is also very exciting. But Plan Onondaga that Sam and I work on together, with our team. And Plan Onondaga is the charter required countywide plan project. And we hope to be able to roll a draft of that out early next year. But I just wanted to go over the fact that, that project is going on. And if you want to know more about it, there's plan.ongov.net, where there's a series of story maps for each theme. And the reason I bring this up is that there's 5 themes. There's strong centers or center-oriented development, housing and neighborhoods, which obviously feeds into this conversation, community mobility, which is really how we get around in our community, greenways, which is protecting our important natural areas, and agriculture, which is protecting our agricultural resources. And what we're doing with this plan is we're looking how they all intersect through our guiding principles of economic development, quality of life, and community engagement. And the next step with this plan is to really look at what is the plan. So those story maps on the website go through each one of these themes. And I think that a lot of the information that Sam's going to present today is present in those story maps. So you can really go into those and see some basic information of what these themes involve, and also look at some data and some maps that are really interesting to look at. And then, with this plan, which kind of gets down to what this forum is a little bit about, is we're really looking at it from the point of view of what can the county do and what can our 35 municipalities do to further this plan? What resources do they need, whether it's education or infrastructure or whatever it is, because one of the things that the county can do is really provide the structure around and the certainty around which others can either plan or build. And that's really, when you talk about housing, that's one of the things that we're going to need to do in the next several years. We also just finished an agri-farmland protection plan, and we have a lot of other plans that are going to be coming out next year, including a housing study, which will really set up a countywide housing program. And that's one of the things that we need. I think it was Eisenhower said, plans are useless, but planning is everything. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with Plan Onondaga, with the housing plan, is to put a program in place, not just a static plan, not just this is where we're at now, but this is where we're at now. This is what we need tomorrow. This is how we're going to get there. This is how we're going to monitor it. This is how we're going to incentivize it. All those wonderful things, which I think the questions that we got beforehand kind of spoke to. I will end with saying one of the things, and of course my agency does a lot in the city, but I'm going to let Michelle talk about that stuff, and we'll talk about that as we go. I could go on for an hour just talking about the things that we're doing and trying to finish. One of the things I find interesting from the questions and from my experience just out and about with friends and neighbors is the awareness of the need for affordable housing, for quality affordable housing everywhere in our communities from a variety of different angles. And that I can tell you something, I don't know if Sam and Michelle can back this up, but I remember 10 or 15 years ago, it was like a third rail topic. Like you tried to not bring it up. You tried to address it, but you tried to not bring it up. And today now people from all walks of life are really recognizing that that's a super important issue in our communities, in our municipalities, and how we're building things out. So I think that is a real sea change in our society, and it really affects what we as planners are really able to do. And it energizes us to actually do them. So with that, I'm going to leave it until the questions come in, and we'll delve a little deeper where people want to go.
Thanks so much, Dan, for that really good in-depth conversation. And I really like how you highlighted the area around affordable housing and how more common that is in a conversation. And I think in part because we start to see even locally this emergence of people wanting and demanding affordable quality housing. And I think it really kind of stems from every generation, right? So you have like Gen Z generation who's like, we are inundated with student loans and we can't afford to buy current student. Every time I talk, this happens. We are inundated with with student loans, and we can't afford to buy affordable housing. Even from our high earners who are saying we want diversity in our communities, even if it's economic diversity, racial diversity, right? We want these things. We see the benefits of having an integrated society. So I'm really happy that you brought that up and kind of recognizing this emergence of advocacy around that issue, including housing being a human right, and all folks are deserving of having good, clean, quality housing. So with that, I will introduce Michelle to talk a little bit about what the city has been doing to sort of this kind of initiative around the housing needs of our city. Michelle Sczpanski is a Deputy Commissioner of the Neighborhood Development for the City of Syracuse. Her portfolio includes a range of initiatives aimed at promoting safe, affordable, and quality housing, including neighborhood planning, housing development, federal and state grant program administration, and lead hazard reduction. Sczpanski joined the city staff in 2016. She most recently served as the Director of Housing and Neighborhood Planning, in which she led development in the city's resurgence of neighborhood initiative strategy and infill housing plan. She also played a key role in advancing the city's strategic code enforcement efforts by leading the creation of its community housing ambassador program, overseeing efforts to require banks and loan servicers to bring vacant properties into code compliance, and supporting the implementation of Syracuse rental inspection and lead paint ordinances. A new ordinance I think everyone's really excited to see how it will impact our communities. She's a graduate of the Syracuse University, where she received Bachelor of Arts degrees in Policy Studies, Citizenship and Civic Engagement, and Public Relations. Outside of her role at the city, believe it or not, she does have a personal life. She also serves as a member of the board of directors of the Near West Side Initiative. And in her free time, she enjoys hiking, paddling, climbing, and backpacking through the many diverse landscapes upstate and central New York have to offer. Michelle?
Thank you so much, Nessa, for the introduction, and thank you all to Focus for inviting me here to speak with you today. It's really a pleasure to be here. So today I'm going to talk with you all a little bit about a project that we recently kicked off within the city of Syracuse that we're referring to as our housing market study. There's obviously certainly no shortage of topics that we could talk about when it comes to what's going on in the state of our city's housing. And I got to say, it's a really interesting change of pace to be asked here to speak on a panel where everyone is talking about what we're doing with studies and planning. I don't know what Sam and Dan's crowds are usually like in the public meeting realm, but a reaction that I get from people pretty commonly is, why are we doing another study and not doing more things about it, particularly when we're talking about issues that are as serious as safe housing and lead poisoning for our kids. But, there is some truth within that. I think we're all obviously aware of kind of the legacy of that the city has as a post-industrial city, the impact that 7 decades of population decline up until this last year have had kind of on our housing stock and housing conditions, the impact that that's had in terms of oversupply of housing units, but then at the same time, those housing units not necessarily being safe or healthy for people to be living in. Lastly, we know really that we struggle kind of persistently with some of the highest concentrated poverty rates in the country, and that as a result of very intentional policy decisions, very often, especially our Black residents, are still disproportionately feeling those impacts. So although those are all a lot of things that we kind of generally know to be true, the reality is that here in the city of Syracuse, we've actually never had any sort of kind of comprehensive evaluation of what that looks like on our housing conditions and what that all means for our overall kind of housing stock. So really what we are kind of hoping to establish within the context of this project is to create kind of a fact-based, objective understanding of what exactly the current state of our housing conditions and trends are, and how that then in turn impacts our current needs and opportunities for sort of where we go from here. We're really interested in kind of trying to figure out like what this all then suggests about our future. Where are we seeing variations across neighborhoods or even from a block to block within a given neighborhood within the city, where the housing types and costs that we know are kind of unbalanced relative to other places in the city, where are we unbalanced relative to the county as a whole? How are we currently meeting the need for affordable housing? Are we? I think a lot of people would say no. Are we positioned to kind of continue to meet that in the future? So essentially what we're trying to do is gather as much information as we possibly can about our housing demographics, the economy, and really just get a clear sense of what's going on. And then more importantly, I think is to contextualize that in the sense of kind of what it all means. I think as you can see, as I'm going on here, there's a lot more questions than answers, I think, that we have at this point, or at least easy answers. And I think that that's frankly okay and important, especially at this moment in our city's development, considering the level of investment that Micron is going to bring to the community is frankly quite mind-boggling. And it's while it's an unprecedented opportunity, I think it's really important that we're committed to continuing to kind of examine and re-examine everything that we've sort of kind of understood or thought that we knew about what exactly the city's housing challenges are, and then how we kind of best solve them in order to make the most of that. So with that, I think the kind of second key goal that we have within this is to figure out how this all fits together, working alongside with the community and stakeholders, so we can figure out where we go from here. Numbers for numbers' sake aren't all that good. I think kind of similar to Dan's line about the plan. We could have a really a much more improved housing market because of increased demand and boost a lot of property values, which certainly could be a goal. But what about if that is negatively impacting affordability even further? What do we actually mean when we talk about what equitable outcomes are? What does that mean for us collectively as a city? What does that mean across individual neighborhoods, understanding that they're all starting at different places? What does that mean for us as a city that exists within the larger county ecosystem and in the region as a whole? And lastly, I think kind of what realistic role can housing interventions can and should do they end up playing kind of in that? So kind of as we're looking at a lot of that through the lens of property surveys and other data analysis, it's going to be really important for us that we're working closely with stakeholder groups who represent a wide spectrum of neighborhood residents, affordable housing developers, market rate developers, employers, human service agencies, and the like, to really help us kind of vet the findings as we're working through the process, and make sure that it's really representative of kind of the full spectrum of needs and views that exist within the community when it comes to our housing. And then from there, we're really hoping to be able to kind of establish a framework for how we're thinking about planning and policy interventions moving forwards. So in other words, how do we prioritize within all of our different priorities? Where do we need to kind of differentiate our response to that, to the question of kind of how are we best meeting the needs that exist within different neighborhoods? How can we most effectively leverage the existing resources that we have and the policy tools that we do have to make sure that we're able to kind of have equitable development outcomes? And then what policies or lack thereof are currently limiting our ability to do that now? The one thing I do want to make really clear is that the project that the city is working on is in no way intended to be kind of a quote unquote comprehensive housing plan or a set of neighborhood plans. It's really meant to be a kind of precursor that lays the foundation that then enables us to actually create a full citywide housing plan in the future, and sort of have a much more robust conversation about what that looks like and be intentional about it. Just to kind of give a little bit of an overview of the timing of the process, we're at the very beginning stages of it right now. It's slated to be about an 8-month process, and we should be wrapped up by June of next year. So we're actually later today kicking off training for a group of residents that we've hired to help us conduct block by block property surveys. And then within the next month or so, are going to be starting to convene the first of a series of sessions of our stakeholder working groups. Those groups will meet several times between now and the beginning of December. And then lastly, kind of throughout the process, we're going to be holding a series of public meetings and open houses, just that are open to kind of to the general public, so that we can make sure that people are aware of the process and have the opportunity to weigh in. So certainly a lot more to come in the upcoming months, and a lot of things to look forward to keeping this group updated with as they unfold. So I think I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think what stood out to me and resonated with me the most is how much you mentioned policy and regulations and the role that they actually play in this. And as we see advocate groups advocating for like common cause eviction, rent regulations, tax abatements, some of the things that have been highlighted, but some of the communities that have been historically disenfranchised or marginalized for several different reasons, right? Whether it was government policy or independent discrimination. We think about how typically in the Syracuse market, developers are kind of limited to our market being a soft market. And what does that mean when an organization like, or a business like Micron comes in, and what is that going to look like? And a lot of the conversations that I've been a part of is, are we going to be redeveloping or reinventing how our housing market looks in Syracuse, specifically with houses that are quote unquote either unsafe, right? Because they're not meeting the code regulations, or they're in great risk of having rent inflation because now the market has become a hot market. And so some of those policies, I'm really interested to see how they'll pan out and how they'll protect Syracuse's most vulnerable populations. And so with that, I will introduce Sam Gordon, our next panelist. Sam is the planning practice leader for the EDR. Sam is a certified planner and has over 20 years of experience in planning and sustainability fields with a diverse background, including neighborhood revitalization, greenway planning, sustainable planning, and mobility planning. He has worked in both the public and private sector, as well as internationally. Sam has managed and or provided consulting expertise on a variety of projects from greenway planning, energy conservation, and renewable energy deployment to neighborhood revitalization and alternative mobility projects. Sam received a fellowship in 2005 to work with the Center for Environmental Studies in Victoria, Gasteiz, Spain, which was selected as the European Green Capital for 2012. Sam is currently the project manager for Plan Onondaga and an update of the Onondaga County Comprehensive Plan, as well as Plan Forward, the development of the comprehensive plan for Monroe County. Sam?
Thank you so much, Lanessa, for the introduction. I am going to share a few slides that show some of the understanding that we've begun to develop for the Plan Onondaga project that Dan mentioned. But before I do that, I want to talk about the difference between something that we call affordable housing and something we call housing affordability. And I think it's an important distinction. If we think about affordable housing, typically that is housing that receives some sort of subsidy, and it is targeted for people who really need financial assistance to be able to afford housing, whether it is a single family home ownership opportunity or rental housing. Housing affordability is a much broader discussion that includes affordable housing, but it also looks at the availability of different housing types. And I think that that is a critically important discussion across the county and really across upstate New York. And I'll show why I think that's the case. So the image on the screen is actually an image from the town of DeWitt. This is post-war DeWitt around Carrier Circle, and I think is illustrative of the development pattern across our country, and certainly across central New York and across upstate New York from really the post-war period on until the early 2000s. So the primary driver for development across the country was single family home development. And we all lived through the housing market crash in 2009. And since then, our housing market hasn't really, and probably will never fully recover the way it was. And I think this graph on the screen is really an illustration of why that is the case. So this graph is from the Brookings Institution, and they studied first-time home buyers across the country and looking at demographic and census data. And if you look at this graph on the left-hand side here, in 1968, nearly 70% of first-time home buyers across the country were households with children. And by 2019, nationally, that number had declined to less than 30%. So again, those households with kids, they were looking for a single family house, the American dream, wherever that was, whether it was a city neighborhood, a suburban development, or a rural home. And that is what drove our housing market. But that has kind of been turned on its head. And we are seeing the effects of that across upstate New York and across the country. So the development patterns have been shifting. And this is a photograph from a place called Fairfax Corners in Virginia. This was a surface parking area in a suburban part of the Washington, DC metro area. And it has been converted from a surface parking lot into what we call as planners a mixed use walkable urban neighborhood. This is not an historic neighborhood, it's brand new. It was built from the ground up. And this is what we're seeing in development across the country, is a real shift in the types of housing products that we're constructing. We've seen this happening in the Syracuse metropolitan area. And in fact, since 2017, between 2017 and 2021, there was almost over a 24% increase in rental prices. And we saw that in Onondaga County. We're also seeing that mirrored in Monroe County, the work we're doing with them. And what's happening is folks with higher incomes are choosing to rent. And they may be renting downtown housing, or they may be renting some other type of housing, including multifamily housing throughout the county. And that's driven by this demographic shift. We have baby boomers who have downsized or millennials who don't want a house or haven't purchased a house. They want to live in a walkable urban neighborhood. So those higher income folks with choices are actually driving up the cost of rental housing. And that is affecting the folks who need housing the most, the folks who have the least resources. They are being impacted by that. So there are things that we need to be looking at as a community to try and address, in this case, the affordable housing component that I was mentioning earlier. That there has been a significant change in the concentration of renter households across the county since 2010. And the darkest areas on the screen on the left-hand side are those areas that have seen the biggest change. So downtown Syracuse, the Syracuse lakefront, places like the town of Manlius or town of Lafayette, Clay and Cicero, Camillus. There's been a significant amount of new rental housing that's been constructed across the county. And in many of those places are places where there are residents with higher incomes, which again are driving up the rental costs. We have seen a significant shift in the types of housing that are being constructed in Onondaga County. So this graph, green is showing the number of single family housing units that were constructed in any particular year. And the purple is the number of multifamily units that were constructed in any particular year. And you can see prior to really 2008, the majority of units, vast majority of units that were constructed were single family. Since 2008, that's been turned on its head. And we're seeing a significant number of multifamily units being constructed and many fewer single family units being constructed. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but a lot of that is driven by the demographic shifts that I've talked about. The other thing that we're seeing that we saw even through the pandemic was 20%, almost 20% rise in average home sale prices in Onondaga County. And that happened both countywide and when you look at the city of Syracuse. And that's significant because we've traditionally been a very slow, there's been very slow appreciation in our region, but that was exacerbated during the pandemic. And we don't see any indication that that will change anytime soon. And part of that is driven by the demographic shift that I mentioned. So you have baby boomers and millennials. Millennials delayed buying their first home. Now they're looking to buy their first home as baby boomers are downsizing, and they're both looking for the same product in the marketplace. And fortunately for the baby boomers, they have more resources, they have more money, they're able to outbid the poor millennial and get that house, but that drives up overall home prices. So this is something else that we're experiencing in our community. At the same time, the average sale price for a new home is well over $300,000, and we're building less homes. And that $300,000 price point is really out of reach for most buyers within the county. So lastly, I want to just show, we have done some analysis to look at where there may be opportunities for investing in the sort of urban, more dense, mixed use, walkable neighborhood type development within the county. And this graphic is also available, as Dan said, through the Plan Onondaga website, which is plan.ongov.net. And look for the story map, and you'll find this map under the strong centers section. So what this does is identify areas where we could either we already have or we could be investing in new mixed use walkable developments. And some of this is obvious. This is showing downtown Syracuse, the Syracuse Lakefront, University Hill. But over here, we're looking at Erie Boulevard East in the town of DeWitt. Or we're looking at the West Genesee street corridor out in Fairmount and moving towards Camillus, or looking at the areas just northwest of downtown Syracuse and the lakefront connecting into the village of Liverpool, or looking up along Route 11 North, moving towards the village of North Syracuse. So there are some real opportunities throughout the county to start to focus development. And those opportunities are growing because of the change in retailing that's happening. So there's a lot of vacancy now in big boxes, and that leaves an opportunity for redevelopment of those spaces as new neighborhoods. So this is something that we're looking at as part of a plan Onondaga, and with Dan, I think we're very excited to start to roll out some of the initial recommendations for what could be done here in Onondaga County.
Thanks so much, Sam, for that great conversation and presentation. So many looming thoughts, right, that are coming to my mind as a result of your presentation. And I think the first thing I think about is when you show the picture of the former parking lot that is now a mixed use, diverse, walkable neighborhood, and thinking about the historical context of what parking lots mean, specifically in Syracuse, where we know that a part of urban renewal, 22 parking lots were created at the demise and demolition of Black and Brown communities. And so I just want to elevate that while it may have been a parking lot, I'm not familiar with Fairfax, Virginia, but I certainly know that in the city of Syracuse, those parking lots were in fact paved over, had paved over communities, and just wanted to elevate that. And also thinking about, as we continue to develop these areas to be high density, mixed use areas, how important it is to make sure we're including things like inclusionary zoning that would require developers to create affordable housing for every new development, right? How are we tying in our zoning laws to ensure that there are circuit breakers or property tax abatement plans for folks who currently own land in that area that might see a bump in development, and how that will increase. One, I guess the positive is they will have an increased property value. And as you correctly pointed out, the property values right now are skyrocketing, in part because of COVID, the pandemic, and the need, I think, for, and I guess I could take blame, right? Because maybe 5 years ago, I was one of those people who needed to live in an urban walkable area. But then once you start having children, you get married, you're like, well, this isn't so fun anymore. I need to move to somewhere that's more realistic, right? And so that's kind of what we've seen Gen Z, Gen X, and millennials kind of do over the span of a few years. And so my final thought is, as you mentioned, fewer people are buying single family homes, and it's kind of been like a multi-family kind of approach. I just wonder how important it is to maintain exclusionary zoning now as a result of this kind of new demand and new need for this, what this generation kind of wants to live amongst. So I have more questions in my mind than answers, and I really appreciate presentations that help me out with that. And I will now pass it over to Brian, who will be doing the question and answer.
Thanks, Lanessa. Thanks to all of our panelists and everybody joining us here today. We have quite a few questions that folks were kind enough to send in. I'm going to start with one of my own briefly. Just curious, I grew up in Binghamton. I lived overseas for a year, and I came to Syracuse in '92. So my firsthand adult experience is really here, right? Own my second home with my wife, our two kids. How different is Syracuse? How unique are those societal, cultural, demographic changes? Is everybody else of a similar kind of nature, just like us? Or are there things that are unique? I expect it's a blend of the two, but just curious what you could say about, for those of us who've perhaps been here for 30 years, you know, how different are our challenges and opportunities than other perhaps similar sized places?
I could start, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I don't think we're not all that different. I mean, some of the national trends that we see are mirrored here. Every community, however, has its own nuance. And, you know, there are some, you know, things as a community that I think we should not be proud of and that we need to work on. For example, we have some of the worst and highest concentration of poverty in the country. And I think that's an issue that we need to tackle as a community. But the other thing I want to say, Brian, is that the Syracuse of today is much different than the Syracuse of the late 90s. There was some significant investment made at that time through the Syracuse Neighborhood Initiative. And at that time, I worked for the city of Syracuse and was involved in that process. And during that, there was some seed funding that was put into, developing housing in different neighborhoods, but also in downtown Syracuse. There was a recognition of the importance of a downtown in helping to catalyze new development and new energy in a region. And I think for a city of our size, that's in what we call technically a weak market area where, our housing prices are much lower than other parts of the country. There's been a tremendous amount of development in and around downtown Syracuse that has really changed the picture of the city. And I've gotten to see that throughout my career.
And change it for the better, you're saying?
Yes. Well, yeah. I would say for the better, but there still are very significant challenges that we have as a community, which I started out, by saying.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. Michelle or Dan? Dan, do you want to come in?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I think Michelle kind of alluded to the fact that, when you look at the numbers don't tell the whole story. And so kind of what your question asks is what, I think, Sam said it well, and there's been change, but kind of to your question, no, everybody's looking at the same problem. I mean, you have a baby boom generation that's aging, and so they have different needs than what they had. And you have millennials that oddly have similar desires. But, when we talk about a housing needs assessment, that kind of tells you, these are the people you have. This is what your market is doing right now. And these are the needs that you have that you're either fulfilling or not. So whether it's senior housing or multifamily in an urbanized environment, whatever it is. And then there's the market study, right? The market study tells you kind of, this is what people are looking for. This is what they want. Because let's face it, I think everybody would recognize that you have this dream of what you want, but maybe it's not out there. And so you kind of settle for what you can get, right? Or what you can agree to with your significant other, like my wife and I did many years ago. I think the unique thing about Syracuse and upstate New York is that there's a much stronger expectation traditionally of a single family home with a yard, right? And I think you even see that when I talk with city councilors and neighborhoods in the city, they have a similar expectation. They want people to own a home. They want them to build wealth. They want this American dream, right? I'm not sure when we talk about people, attracting people to the region, filling these jobs, attracting people to actually live here, not commute in from someplace else. We need to know what they want. We need to know what the market needs to provide, what choices they need to provide. And I think that a lot of the questions that we got ahead of time that we've gotten through Plan Onondaga and a lot of the work in the city is people want choices. They want to be able to choose a townhome or a row house or an apartment or a condo or a single family home. They don't want just one thing, and they don't want a monoculture of housing choices out in the suburbs. They want a mix of things. They want a different choice, and they want to know that they can age in that place and find another housing option when they get older, and not have to leave their children or their grandchildren if they're fortunate enough to have them here, and keep them here. We want to keep those people here too. We want to keep those kids here. So, it's complicated. It's a very complicated place, and I think both Sam and Michelle kind of hit on this. It's very near and dear to our hearts because it's one of our basic human needs. The shelter and where you live and how you live. And people live differently now too. They don't necessarily want to maintain a house. That's not going to be their hobby. Their hobby is going to be mountain biking like me, or rock climbing or skiing or whatever it is. And so you have to recognize that too. They want lower maintenance properties, even if it is a single family home in the city. So, and we want to provide the neighborhoods for them too. So,
sure. Michelle, any thoughts on that topic?
I think both Sam and Dan pretty much covered it. The one thing I would add is I do think that we're at a very, very interesting juncture right now, particularly when you talk about concerns around kind of Sam's distinction between housing affordability and affordable housing. And being for as a soft market of a city as we currently are, and then introducing a variable with the magnitude of something like Micron. I don't know that any municipality in the country has really figured out a great way to prevent gentrification from, like, first of all, how do we define and quantify gentrification versus displacement? There's not a consistent manner of doing it. There's all kinds of ways that you can count that. Here locally, we have never settled on a specific way that we want to kind of define and track both of those two different things. And I don't know that there's a good answer for how do we prevent this from becoming a problem before it actually is. So I think that, frankly, that's kind of the challenges before all of us right now that create some interesting opportunity for us kind of moving forward. So.
Gotcha. Well, a nice segue. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the questions we got in advance were on some significant changes in our community upcoming. Let's start with Micron. I understand it's some sort of chip manufacturing effort. One would be hard pressed not to have heard of it, and wonderful news for the community, right? But Michelle, as you mentioned, and quite a few of our question submitters asked, how does it change the game? How do we keep up? What are we going to do? Is this great? Obviously, there's some challenges that come with it, but appreciate each of your thoughts. And Michelle, I know you shared some already, but you have more to say about that. You know, what it changes for us and what we might do to make best use of those changes and guard against some of the potential challenges.
Sure. So I think, and kind of part of what we're hoping to be able to get a little bit more of kind of a clear understanding of in the context of some of the work that we're doing with our study is understanding kind of all of what those trends are. How do we kind of take that into context and project into the future? Obviously, none of these things are crystal balls, right? But I think we do have to have kind of some understanding of you know, if we are anticipating that we're going to be bringing in a lot of jobs and a lot of households with significantly higher incomes, the one potential impact that that could have is that it means that our area median income rises, which could frankly open up some opportunities for basically making that 80% AMI range, which is where kind of a lot of the affordable housing, as it's considered from a federal standpoint, those sorts of incentives are targeted to. So something we really struggle with right now here currently is that we have just so many households with incomes that are so low. It's not that our housing in and of itself is all that expensive relative to other places in the country. It's just that we have such concentrated poverty. So one possibility is that kind of by leveling out the playing field kind of from an economic standpoint, that that could have a benefit of sort of opening up some options for some people. But I think that we also have to be really conscious about kind of making sure that we're also putting in kind of safeguards to make sure that we're not accidentally excluding people from that. So I think that that's where really, I guess what I'm hoping that we can try to kind of establish within all of this is sort of like, where are all of the tipping points of people that we risk leaving behind? I think we certainly know kind of who already has been left behind, that we need to figure out how do we kind of right size that. But where are the places where if we're not being careful, we leave ourselves open to kind of blind spots and sort of further vulnerabilities are all the things I think that we're trying to look into.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sarah,
I
Dan?
think,
Dan,
Michelle, we're seeing this both in Onondaga County and also in Monroe County. In many cases, there are challenges with quality housing, right? The quality of our housing, but in many cases, we have an income problem and not an affordability problem, right? So you can't really separate housing policy from workforce development, economic development, and making sure that people have living wage occupations and that there's an opportunity for that. So I think that's really important. The other thing I want to say is it is really important to understand the nuance in the market, and that's what the city is about to do. And I just want to give one example of that because I think it's really helpful. So we just completed a study with the city and the town of DeWitt and Lemoyne College. We were looking at the neighborhood areas around the college. And we dove deep and we looked at what was happening in terms of housing sale prices and cross-referenced that by house size and number of bathrooms and other factors, and lending. And what we found in some of the city neighborhoods directly adjacent to the college, there was no lending activity over the last 10 years. That's number one. Number two, if you looked at the difference in sale price between a single family home with one bathroom and a single family home with 1.5 or 2 bathrooms, there is a $10,000 to $12,000 cost differential between those two things. And number three, we saw in that particular neighborhood, houses with one bathroom have tended to go and become rental. And houses with at least 1.5 or more have maintained home ownership. So we started to look at a recommendation, which is about building a product that would provide people access to capital to add a half bath or add a full bath to their home. But there's other challenges. They don't know where it should go, or they've never done it before, and they need help. So with that loan product, you can provide architectural services so that they actually have someone to help them do that. And it's really hard to find a contractor right now for anyone that's tried to do any work on their house. So that's also part of the program. So, you know, you really have to understand and dig deep into what's going on to really understand the nuance and be able to develop programs and products and strategies that can effectively address the challenges that the neighborhoods are facing.
Gotcha. Dan, would you like to say any remarks about Micron? Or
Yeah, I'll just kind of zoom back out to the county level. I mean, I think the good news is that you know, there are a lot of benefits, even with, you know, the fears for the same things that we've been kind of worried about even before the announcement. But I think the advantage, I think one of the biggest challenges for us is to scale up our ideas and scale up our projects. So one of the things I know I've talked with Sam about, you know, if you're a developer looking to build in a 2-story building, you know, maybe a mixed use building, you should be looking at doing a 4 or 5-story building. I mean, simple things like that. As far as, you know, one of the things with Plan Onondaga that we're looking at is not just these things in isolation, but how they all intersect. And so our transportation system is going to drive a lot of things. So that's why we're looking at center-oriented development in villages and centers that we can build that are mobility centers where people can work, they can find transportation, they can find options, they can live nearby, you know, all those wonderful things, you know, throughout our county, so that we have a system that people can build around, and that we can prepare ourselves more for the future. Because everybody, you know, we need to be worried about now to the next 20 years when this thing is built out. But what we need to be thinking about as well is the next 20 years after that and what we're setting ourselves up for. Because we didn't do that 70 years ago and it didn't work very well.
Here we are.
So we got to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So we got to know what they are. We got to recognize what they are, and we got to work hard as a community together to really make sure that we prepare the next generation and don't saddle them with a problem. Because I think we can work through the problems and the issues and the opportunities that this presents in the near term. You know, the real challenge is the long range, and really having that vision for how will this really build upon itself and really help our community and help these issues and help the people that are here now as well as the people that are coming. And kind of like I think Michelle might have alluded to it, if you find someplace that's figured all this out, then you got to let us know, because I don't know of anybody that's figured all this out, and everybody's struggling with it and everybody's coming up with different things. And the advantage for us is we can look at those communities and see what they've done, kind of what Sam was talking about. And we got to import a lot of that information and decide which is right for us and which we can do and what we can't. So I think to me that is the first challenge, is just kind of figuring all that out and putting some structure to it and then starting to knock these things out.
I think also to that point too, understanding, I think something I've noticed, I didn't grow up in Syracuse originally. I grew up in a different Rust Belt city further west of here, but settled here kind of after college. But I think too, we sometimes here locally have a kind of sense of like, we're so far behind everybody else. And in reality, in a lot of ways, we're actually doing a lot of things that are much more progressive than what is happening in other places in the country. And I think just really being willing to kind of think creatively about what the opportunities are and kind of like take a leadership role and kind of figuring out what that looks like for people is something for us to all kind of keep in mind as well.
That's great. That's heartening to hear. That's great.
Yeah, agreed. I think we can be a leader. There's no
Yeah.
reason why we can't be, and we are in many cases.
Great.
I think there's one other thing that's really critically important in this discussion about Micron
Please.
is that New York we're a home rule state. So Michelle can focus on, and the city can focus on the city. Dan can't really do anything about housing policy directly anywhere else in Onondaga County. That's done at the local level, at the towns and villages. Each town and each village has its own local land use, its own zoning code. And that's the biggest challenge that we have as a county in addressing the needs that are going to come from the Micron project. Every local municipality should have a comprehensive plan. They should have a zoning code, and they should be updating those on a regular basis because things change constantly, and that's not always the case. So I think that there is some catch up that we're going to need to do in order to prepare. And the city's way out in front of this with their housing study and the work that they've been doing. But the rest of the county is going to have to catch up. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to accomplish with Plan Onondaga is set a framework for how the county might be able to influence what's going on in those towns and villages. And the county's already done this under County Executive McMahon. You know, they have, for example, a town planning grant, which is working with local municipalities to help them to do things like update their local regulatory framework. So, you know, the county can't make them do it, but they can provide incentives and encourage people to do things. And I think that that's going to be incredibly important in the near term and all the way up through the next 20 years as Micron's project continues to develop.
Gotcha. Sam, thanks for bringing that up as we had a question about home rule. So appreciate you touching on that. We had a few questions about Interstate 81, right? A significant sea change for our community. Dan, you mentioned transportation, obviously that plays into it, but we don't have a whole ton of time left, but if folks could give their thoughts on how the proposed changes to the expected changes to 81 change things, appreciate hearing it. Can't all talk at once.
Yeah, the current plan that DOT has put forward really, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but God knows I sat through enough presentations with them at board meetings and things, which is great. Mark Frechette did a great job, you know, keeping in touch with everybody and keeping everybody informed. You know, but one of their main goals was to maintain, you know, current patterns, right? And which is fairly normal for a large state agency like that. And now the city, I think, wisely has hired Dover Cole to kind of reimagine what that means for the city and what it means for the urban fabric and how people live in the city and what happens. And I think that's great. So I think the most change you're going to see is in the city. And you know, when you look at commuter patterns and people working from home and different things like that, I think you know, it's not going to disrupt people's transportation patterns in the county to the point where it's like, oh, but I will say we are going to study that. We are going to do a similar effort to say, all right, you know, well, how does this affect the county? And I think the county executive has wisely set aside money, and the legislature approved it in the budget to do an I-81 impact study. And some of that is pragmatic, like businesses. You know, there are businesses that are going to be affected by this, but a lot of it is how, you know, what should the county be doing? What should towns and villages be doing to prepare for this change in the county? Because at the end of the day, you know, I'm guessing that it won't disrupt things much, but it might, you know, it may. And there may be things that they need to do locally, you know, like housing and transportation options and our you know, countywide transit system, you know, to adjust for that. And kind of going back to the Micron announcement, I think that's it presents some opportunities that weren't on the table and some certainty that didn't exist before. So I think all told, I think everyone can benefit from that project. We just need to find a way to do that and make sure that we protect those that may be impacted. So
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
It's an interesting question because there's no like, it's not like Micron was like, oh, we're gonna have 50,000 more people here in 20 years or whatever, you know, which is like, oh, like that at least we can say, all right, well, we got to put them somewhere. You know, with I-81, it's like, well, we're going to have a very different city center, but I think we're still going to have 30,000 people working, you know, on the east side of downtown, and even more people working on the west side of 81. So, and I think the city will be more well connected. So as far as impacts in the city, I think it's very significant, and I think that the city is doing a good job working through that. The counting is still kind of a question mark. So we're hopefully in the next year or two, we'll find out.
Gotcha.
And make adjustments where we need to.
I want to jump in to give Michelle and Sam a chance because we're getting close to time. But Michelle, did you want to come in on this?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I think for the city's part, kind of understanding that the impact of the highway coming down is one thing, but I think that there's sometimes a little bit of kind of not a full comprehensive picture that people have of sort of there's a highway redevelopment, and then there's also what's happening kind of in the neighbor adjacent residential area, in the area that's all owned by Syracuse Housing. And what does the redevelopment of that project look like? It's very top of mind for us that we're making sure that the impact of what we're doing kind of moving forward is cognizant of the legacy that what we've done with redlining and kind of paving over in a completely vibrant neighborhood, and making sure that we're still able to that the residents that have been there are able to kind of see the vision of their neighborhood that they would like to see kind of come to a reality. So those are all things that are kind of priorities for us on our end. And so I think that that's the challenge that lies before us, is making sure that we're really effectively balancing kind of the impact of development without not having the needs of the people that have been there for a really long time kind of top of mind. So
Gotcha. Thank you. Sam, any last words? Oh, Sam, I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Brian. I'm just reminded of Vito Cicciola. I don't know if Vito's listening, but he was a former community and economic development commissioner for the city. And he used to talk about, he called it the Fertile Crescent. So it was connecting University Hill through downtown Syracuse to the Syracuse lakefront. And the thing about the 81 project and removing that barrier is that you will be connecting the major economic engines of Onondaga County and central New York. Micron's a game changer. That's not in the place I'm talking about, but the places that have led to our economic stability are the places that are located in that area. And it's also adjacent to some of the most disadvantaged communities in Onondaga County, or perhaps the most disadvantaged communities. And those communities now will have barriers removed so that they have physical access to some of the assets that we have here in the community. And I think the city, there's so much going on with Blueprint 15 and otherwise, you know, this region is poised, I think, to find success from these two mega projects, from Micron and from 81. I think there's a lot to feel good about as a community and as a region.
That's great. Well, nice to end on a hopeful note. Thanks to you all. Rita, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Brian. I thought I had taken the spotlighting off of everybody, but I guess anyway. Oh, I know why. Hold on, gallery. Okay, sorry, everybody. I hope this has been wonderful. Michelle, Dan, Sam, thank you so much for your participation. And of course, Brian, thank you for moderating the Q&A. I believe little Vanessa had to leave a little bit early, but we certainly appreciate her efforts as well in this, her participation. This has been recorded, so if you know, to our audience, if you know folks who would benefit from this and would like to view it, it will be posted on our website in the next few days. It's a huge topic. You can tell, I'm sure we're all a little bit frustrated because you can't address all the issues that are here. And this is our third forum this year that relates to housing. So it's not, we know that there's a lot going on in housing and how important it is to so many people. So again, thank you to our presenters. Just a couple of things I want to make you aware of. First of all, we have our Wisdom Keeper celebration next Tuesday, October 25th from 5:30 to 7:30 at Daniela's Fresh Seafood and Pasta House. We're hoping that many of you have signed up and are going to be joining us. Tickets are still available on our website if that's of interest to you. That's going to be, and we are honoring Calvin Corridors, who's the regional president of Pathfinder Bank, and Pam Brunet, who's executive director of Leadership Greater Syracuse. They've both been tremendous contributors to our community, and we are pleased to be able to honor them. We are also having a free event on Thursday at noon, where we will be installing, or we will be unveiling a plaque that recognizes them as our Wisdom Keeper. That will be right outside of City Hall Commons in the little Wisdom Keeper garden there, and all are welcome to join us there. A very quick ceremony for about a half an hour. The last thing I'd like to say is, Focus runs on a very tight budget. We always appreciate any donations that people are willing to give us. That can be made on our website as well, and would, as I said, would appreciate anything. And other than that, have a great day, have a great weekend. Thanks again, and we'll sign off. Take care.